Hey guys, what's going on? It's me, Jay. I'm here to do a video about the retirement of James Earl Jones, the most iconic Star Wars character in all of Star Wars. I think if you ask anybody what is the character that people most identify with Star Wars and with George Lucas, more than likely they would say that that character would have to be Darth Vader. Some might say Yoda because of course, the popularity of Baby Yoda or Grogu in The Mandalorian. But I would say it is Darth Vader because, according to George Lucas, or at least how he shifted the narrative and how he shifted the story, the whole thing was about Darth Vader or Anakin Skywalker. But one thing I wanted to point out, and of course thank James Earl Jones for providing the voice, because the voice is essentially the character. Sure, the black suit, the black helmet, the attire was the character as well, but the voice, what the opening lines of basically Star Wars is from the entire saga from 1977 is you are part of the Rebel Alliance and a traitor. Take her away, addressing, of course, Princess Leia. Now, in the original uh, shooting of the movie in 1977, there was another guy who did that voice, and the guy who did the voice was the guy in the suit, David Prowse, a British bodybuilder, and he had the build, he had the physique for it, but he did not have the voice for it. There's footage on YouTube. If you watch him delivering that line, that very same line, without James Earl Jones's voice than his actual voice, and his voice is a very low and squeaky voice. And David Prowse passed away um 2 years ago, and I've read his book, and it really hurt him that he wasn't chosen for the role in the entire thing because they had him recorded all of Darth Vader's lines, which weren't very many in the original, and he never got to deliver any of them. And plus, he was never told, nor was anybody ever told about the actual leak that Darth Vader was Luke's father in Episode 5. But then again, he claimed he knew. I don't think anybody really knew this because it was changed. Remember, Lee Brackett passed away in the middle of writing it, and Lucas was forced to scrap it. And this is Empire Strikes Back. Lucas was forced to scrap it, and then went with the whole entire storyline that Darth Vader and Anakin Skywalker were the same guy. Because in the original first drafts of Empire Strikes Back, Anakin Skywalker is a different person than Darth Vader. They're not the same person. Darth Vader is the villain of the film, or the villain of the second film. Because in the first one, he was sort of a background character. He was sort of a henchman. It gave the first movie, A New Hope, gave you the impression that um, Grand Moff Tarkin, Peter Cushing's character, was the main villain. I mean, he's the one giving orders. Even Princess Leia says you have Darth Vader on a leash, on your leash like a dog. So Darth Vader was essentially the muscle behind it, but he was not the main protagonist. By Episode 5, Empire Strikes Back, this completely shifts, and Lucas going with that surprise, that twist ending, set the course for what the other movies would be. Of course, it completely changes Return of the Jedi. It completely, and of course, gives birth to the prequels. The idea that Lucas wants to go back and backtrack the fall of Anakin Skywalker, and the first six films becomes essentially a saga about Anakin Skywalker. Of course, then Disney buys it in 2012 and they decide to resurrect it, and all of a sudden it becomes about the entire Skywalker family, and they tie Rey into it, but that wasn't part of the original uh, trilogy that wasn't part of Lucas's plan. Lucas's plan, from the time that he made Darth Vader the father of Luke in Episode Five, was to make it the saga of Darth Vader, and before that it was supposed to be Luke as the main protagonist of the film. Then Vader becomes the antagonist and the lead protagonist, the heel, as well as the babyface, to steal a phrase from pro wrestling. But he wasn't that initially. He was just a background character, and I think he was supposed to be, even in the first drafts of the movie, he was supposed to be killed off. Because keep in mind, Lucas didn't know if this was going to be a success. So if you look at the first film, from beginning to end, it's completely self-contained. Luke blows up the Death Star, and we don't really know what happens to Darth Vader afterwards. It starts in the middle. The first shot, it's medias res, a Latin word borrowed, of course, from the epics that Star Wars borrows from: Iliad, the Odyssey. And then right in the middle is that as the rebels and the rebels and the Empire are shooting at each other, comes this menacing figure in a black samurai suit, looking all menacing and pushing people around with the power of the Force. That's really impressive to a kid. And I can't imagine what it must have been like in 1977 to see something like that. And the voice, James Earl Jones's voice, was part of that package. If it didn't have the voice, I don't think it would have been as iconic. Even the breathing sound. As you hear John Williams' score, everything fit together perfect. The Imperial March, everything fit together perfectly, like little pieces to a puzzle, in creating the aura around Darth Vader and becoming a character that transcended science fiction movies and transcended movies in general. There are people out there that have never watched Star Wars saga in its entirety, but if you mention to them who is Darth Vader, or the line which people usually mess up, um, Luke, I am. They always say Luke, I am your father. To correct it, it's not Luke, I am your father. The answer is the real line is Obi-Wan never told you what happened to your father. And then Luke says, he told me enough. He told me you killed him. No, I am your father. And then, of course, Luke yells it out, no. And this is the scene when they're on Bespin. But that line, even though they messed it up due to the Mandela effect, they messed it up a lot. People know that line. That's like up there with Mama always said, life is like a box of chocolates, or um, when Dirty Harry, Clint Eastwood's character in Dirty Harry, says, make my day. I mean, these are certain lines in every movie that everybody knows, even if they've never seen the movie. They're part of the pop culture zeitgeist. And James Earl Jones makes that possible. I can't imagine Dave Prowse delivering that line with any sort of authority. Without So where do we go from here? As we saw in the Obi-Wan Kenobi series, um, when Obi-Wan slices off a piece of Vader's mask, and then they have that old dialogue where Vader basically ties up a lot of loose ends and says that he was the one, by him becoming Darth Vader in Revenge of the Sith, he was the one that killed Anakin Skywalker, not Obi-Wan. Basically, um, assuaging Obi-Wan's guilt, and also endearing himself deeper to the dark side. His anger and his despair is what gives him the power to become the unstoppable force that he becomes. And when he does give into his caring side, his nurturous side, that is when ultimately in Return of the Jedi he switches from dark to light. So I want to thank James Earl Jones for his contributions to the Star Wars legacy. He basically is Star Wars. Without him, there wouldn't be we wouldn't be talking about it to this day. So thank you, James Earl Jones, and may the force be with you always. But what becomes of it now? Well, he sold his the rights to his voice to a computer developer in the Ukraine, which will use a computerized digital version of his voice. But I wonder, will it still be this? Will it still be the same? You know what I mean? Because when they switched over to CGI when it came to Yoda, people didn't like it as much. I remember being in the theaters when the puppetry Yoda of Frank Oz came back in return. The Last Jedi in 2017, and everybody hated The Last Jedi, but the only thing they really liked about it was the return of an actual Yoda. People hated and shitted all over the computerized CGI version of Yoda. You know what I mean? The digitalized version of Yoda. They wanted to see the original Yoda that was in Empire Strikes Back, that was in Return of the Jedi. So when he came back, that was what fans loved, and that's what fans gravitated to, that organic feel for the Yoda character. So will it be the same thing with Darth Vader? Will they enjoy this version of Darth Vader, this voice of Darth Vader that doesn't have James Earl Jones? But of course, James Earl Jones is an elderly man, so I think he wanted to hang it up before it became too, um, too taxing on his body and his physical health. Unfortunately, I wish we would have seen more of him in Revenge of the Sith. I know Revenge of the Sith is supposed to tell the story with Hayden Christensen of how Vader became Vader, but the only thing we really got from James Earl Jones in episode 3 was the no. And also, where's Padme? Is she safe? Is she all right? Like, that was like 10 minutes of this iconic voice of this iconic character that we've all come to know and love. And we didn't get much of it in the prequels. I wish they would have did the turn in episode 2. So okay, Hayden Christensen already turns to Darth Vader, and then we could have throughout episode 3 got the entire movie with just Vader. But unfortunately, we didn't get that. You know, we got what we got, but we have the original trilogy to look back on. And besides the voice of um, Darth Vader, James Earl Jones is also the voice of Mufasa, another Disney movie that we've spoken about recently on this channel. And one of the funniest things I remember seeing James Earl Jones in, and this is completely off topic, is an episode of Will and Grace. Jack McFarlane, Jack Sean Hayes' character on the show, is doing his one man show, just Jack. And then James Earl Jones appears. So he's like, James Earl Jones, take it down a couple of octaves, and he has him do a line from Sex in the City in a girly voice. He's like, James Earl Jones, more like James Girl Jones. And then you see James Earl Jones doing a girly voice. The clip is just hilarious. Check that out. James Earl Jones' appearance on Will and Grace, it was epic. But yeah, without James Earl Jones, man, would have never lent it any credibility, I don't think. And plus his diction of being a Shakespearean actor and the epicness that George Lucas wanted to add to this movie. Being inspired by William Shakespeare, being inspired by Ovid, being inspired by Virgil, being inspired by Homer, all this epic, all these epic stories that he got from Joseph Campbell. He really wanted to add gravitas to it, and I think James Earl Jones's voice did that. Classical English English gravitas, a classically trained actor. Even though he was from Mississippi, I swore for the longest that James Earl Jones was actually British, just because of his amazing diction and his amazing enunciation of words. It didn't sound like anything that came out of an American. So anyway, um, you know, safe future for James Earl Jones. Thank you for the memories. Thank you for bringing this character to life. Even though he was a villain, he was my favorite character in the whole series, even more so than Yoda. I mean, Yoda dispensed a lot of wisdom, and Yoda, of course, inspired by many of the classical sages of the East, like Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha, or Confucius, or Lao Tzu, Chinese philosopher. But Darth Vader felt like a villain that you want to cheer for, much in the same vein of Tony Montana or other classical villains. He had he had the people, man, and it was a movie, but it was sort of like a pro wrestling angle in a way. Vader did a babyface turn, man, when he turned babyface in Episode 6, and it was because of the belovedness that James Earl Jones had instilled into the character. Because here he comes from being basically a side character, a sidekick, a henchman, to being the main focus of the story, the evolution of the character and the evolution of the importance of the character is one of those things that when you read a book, say like Michael Kaczynski's book, Secret History of Star Wars, you really be like, damn, because the mythology around um, Star Wars and how it was created. And people say, oh, well, George Lucas wrote it in 9 parts and he had this mapped out and he had that mapped out. Not really. I mean, this book basically strips it down to the bare bones and basically just says that Lucas wanted to purchase the rights to Flash Gordon, the movie serials that he'd grown up with in the 30s and 40s, and he wasn't able to do that. So he basically said, "I'll write my own Flash Gordon," and he took a lot from Akira Kurosawa, a Japanese director's movie, The Hidden Fortress. He took a lot from Stan Lee and Jack Kirby with their classic comic book characters. That's where the title "The Lord of the Sith" comes in. He took a lot from Isaac Asimov. He took a lot from Frank Herbert, who wrote Dune. He took a lot from this place and that place, but the bare bones of it, the skull of it, was Japanese samurai movies. And you can kind of see that with Vader because his mask is basically a Japanese samurai mask. I mean, look at his mask and look at the samurais and say the Tom Cruise movie, The Last Samurai, or any samurai movie. You basically see the influence. And the asthmatic breathing, the iron lung, yeah, in the iron, you know, that adds to it too, and the deep voice. Of course, he's supposed to sound like he's robotic. He's more machine now than man, as Alec Guinness says in Allen Guinness as Obi-Wan says in Episode 4. So James Earl Jones, the depth of his voice sounded machine-like, and oddly enough, now it is machine-like. It is computer generated. So we'll have to see where it goes in the other series that they do on the era of Darth Vader, which is the Empire era and the era of Palpatine's rule. They're doing something now with in that vein, the Andor, but I think Cassian Andor never speaks about Darth Vader in Rogue. Haley, so what's going on? He never speaks. Diego Luna's character, Cassian Andor, in Rogue One at least, um, doesn't speak about Darth Vader, so I don't know if Vader will show up. But he's the baddest man in the whole galaxy, so more than likely he will show up. But it has nothing to do um, with James Earl Jones anymore, but just to see, what the new voice sounds like. 'Cause I said we got glimpses of it in the fight scene in Kenobi, but we didn't get to really see it, fleshed out lines. How's it going to come about? But I'm glad James Earl Jones got this chance. But the thing is, with Dave Prowse, I do kind of feel sad for him because, yeah, Lisa says the rights now belong to Lucasfilm and the Ukrainian AI audio company, Reese Feature. Yeah, yeah, Lisa, that's 100% correct. Disney and Lucasfilm um, own the rights, and the Ukrainian company owns the rights. But it's never going to be the same, guys. You know what I mean? I feel without James Earl Jones' personal touch. Um, I read in the book, Michael Kaczynski's book, again, Secret History of Star Wars. I recommend people check this book out. James Earl Jones actually says to Lucas when they were filming episode 3 in 2005, he says, "When do I come back?" You know what I mean? Because he was ready. He was ready to do a whole movie of, delivering those iconic lines. But that wasn't what Lucas had in mind. And actually, Hayden Christensen, funny because people always complain about, yeah, he's 91 years old. People always complain about how Hayden Christensen, his cadence, his way of speech, his speech pattern, that it sounded really wooden. But if you go and you look and you listen to interviews now by Hayden and how he patterned his voice, he patterned his speech pattern after James Earl Jones because he figured, hey, I'm channeling the guy that played Darth Vader in the original, so I'm going to try to speak like him. He didn't have the voice of James Earl Jones, because so it didn't sound the same. He sounded like he was, boring. He didn't add inflections to his voice. But keep in mind, James Earl Jones didn't have to add any inflections to his voice because his voice was so deep and commanding, and plus nobody saw his face. You know what I mean? So Hayden Christensen tried to, in the prequel version, tried to play it this exact same way, but you can't when you're the Darth Vader before his accidents versus the one after his accidents. You know what I mean? Because it's completely different. We're seeing Hayden's face. We didn't see James Earl Jones's face. He played the voice. He didn't play he wasn't in the suit. You know what I mean? And even Dave Prowse in the suit didn't have to emote because he's completely behind a shrapnel of metal. You know what I mean? So Hayden tried to copy it, but it didn't work out. And like I said, I felt actually when I read Dave Prowse, what Dave Prowse had to say about it, I actually felt bad because he felt in a way that he wasn't good enough. And really he wasn't good enough. You know what I mean? Like, you can't blame him that his voice sounded the way it sounded, but if you watch the original outtakes of when he recorded the voice, I mean, imagine going to the movie screen in 1977, this epic opening with John Williams and the score and the Star Wars music and the title crawl and the galaxy far, far away, and then seeing Darth Vader coming out menacing, walking on the Death Star, and then all of a sudden this guy with a Mickey Mouse voice like Mike Tyson, you know, basically, part of the Rebel Alliance and a traitor. Take her away. It doesn't, this whiny, nasally Ben Shapiro like voice. People are just gonna laugh at it. You know what I mean? No command in your voice, no bass in your voice. Basically, sounding like a wimpy little girl. People would have just laughed at it. It wouldn't have became the 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 iconic movie that it became and the iconic character it became. Instead, James Earl Jones put his voice in it, and he said, "No, you're a part of the Rebel Alliance and a traitor. Take her away." And it sounded like he was actually, he was actually menacing. He was actually something to be afraid of. Well, Lisa says Darth thought Vader should reveal himself as a black man before James Earl Jones officially retires, but I know that won't happen because Star Wars fans are racist. Um, yeah, Star Wars fans being racist, Lisa, I don't know. I mean, yes, I mean we saw that in 2015 with John Boyega's character, but Darth Vader being a black man doesn't make any sense because Luke is not black, and Luke is his son. You know what I mean? So him revealing himself to be actually James Earl Jones would completely change the the, the direction of where the story is going. Sure, it would be something, but then you would have to change it and make Luke black. You know what I mean? How can you make that? How can you make how can Leia be his daughter and she's white? So how can you make that? I mean, they could be adopted, but Leia's already adopted by a Puerto Rican father. You know, Jimmy Smith as half Puerto Rican, half black, um, from Suriname. His mom's from Suriname. I mean, father from Suriname, I believe. And Jimmy Smith as Leia, or I mean, Bail Organa. You know, so if Darth Vader wasn't his father and they didn't make that major change that they made in the screenplay for um, uh, Empire Strikes Back, then it would make sense, but it doesn't make sense in the context of the story. I mean, and some would argue I wasn't alive in 1980. That was 5 years before I was born, so I can't tell you what the reactions were when when he said those words. But I've seen footage of people in the theaters in 1980 when Empire Strikes Back came out, and people were just shocked that Darth Vader was his father. First of all, some people believe Darth Vader was lying at first because they're like, "Oh well, Obi-Wan's a good guy. How can Obi-Wan basically lie to Luke's face?" He told him uh, in the dialogue, Darth Vader betrayed and murdered your father. You know, we all remember it. The iconic line from Allen Guinness as he hesitates. And he actually, when, and this only makes sense after Lucas wrote it in that Vader was Luke's father. When he asked Allen Guinness the question, he says, how did my father die? And then Allen Guinness pauses, almost like when somebody's lying and they're thinking of a story a story that they're going to tell, but they take a long time to answer. And then Allen Guinness swallows, and he's like, "A young Jedi named Darth Vader betrayed and murdered your father." So that's what Luke believed. So the audience at the time when Empire Strikes Back came out, they believed that too. Oh well, he must be lying. You know, he and that was the original point. What I mean? The reveal, the big surprise was supposed to be that Darth Vader was the one who killed Luke's father. You know what I mean? And then it was supposed to be revealed in episode 6, which at that time was part 3, Return of the Jedi, that um, Luke's father actually wasn't dead, that he was still alive, and he was supposed to be the Force Ghost instead of Yoda and Obi-Wan being the Force Ghost. But when Lucas went for that change and Lucas made Vader his dad, it was like, okay, well, what about Obi-Wan? Obi-Wan just basically lied. And then and then the quick cover up in Return of the Jedi when he asked Obi-Wan, well, you told me something different. How come you told me that? And he said, what I told you was true from a certain point of view. And then Luke is like, from a certain point of view. You know what I mean? So if they actually made James Earl Jones the actual character, he could say, well, you are black from, and Luke says, well, why I'm not black? He could be like, well, you are black from a certain point of view. you know, they can save it that way. But I don't, I don't think they will because a certain segment of the Star Wars audience is already endeared to um, to Hayden Christensen playing the pre Darth Vader version of Anakin. But actually, some people wish it was Sebastian Shaw. And who's Sebastian Shaw? Well, he's the actor that plays Darth Vader after Luke takes off the mask. Of course, Vader is about to die, and uh, and Vader and he says to his son, "Take off my mask. I want to finally see you with my own eyes." And then Luke says, "Well, if I do that, you'll die." And then he takes off the mask, and it's Sebastian Shaw. And when he sees him as a Force ghost, they're all having a party after blowing up the second Death Star. He sees him as a Force ghost. Was the original Force ghost in the original 1983 version of Return of the Jedi appears is the actor Sebastian Shaw. So multiple people have actually played Darth Vader over the years, but nobody has played the voice of Darth Vader in the same way. It's weird because the voice is almost more iconic than the person. Because Vader was only just a voice at first because he burned up in lava. His limbs were completely burned off. He couldn't even breathe on his own. He was severely disabled after his first battle on Mustafar. Well, what we thought was his first battle. Star Wars is always constantly changing history and changing its canon. It's like an ever evolving arc. First it's this, then it's that. Like first we're led to believe in A New Hope that Vader and Obi-Wan never met again after Mustafar. But now, because of the Kenobi series, now they fought once before um, after Obi-Wan had the high ground and defeated him. You know, you know what I mean? But still, he was severely disabled. His entire limbs were cut off. He was burnt alive. The scene, I'll never forget it. That's one of the things I loved about episode 3, uh, when Obi-Wan finally cuts him up and he's in agony screaming, I hate you, I hate you. I always thought he said, I had you. Like, oh, I would have beat you if it wasn't for this lava. But people say, no, it's I hate you, I hate you. So he's burning up and Obi-Wan, Ewan McGregor as Obi-Wan, looks over at him and goes, Anakin, I loved you. You were my brother. Because remember, they're Jedi. So they're not allowed to interact with other people. They're not allowed to have girlfriends. They're not allowed to have significant others. They're not even allowed to be attached to each other. So a Padawan like Anakin and a student, a teacher like Obi-Wan, uh, that's the only guy he's spending his time with. You know what I mean? So they really bonded together in those battles. They didn't show any of that, and I wish they would have showed some of it. They showed us some of it later in the cartoons like Attack of the Clones and Star Wars, the Attack of the Clones cartoon in 2008, and the Rebels cartoon, and um, you know some of the cartoons they done later on, the Clone Wars cartoon, but we never really got to see how Anakin was the greatest pilot in the galaxy or even why he was the chosen one. You know what I mean? So, like, again, Star Wars always changing stuff. But one thing they always kept constant was Darth Vader's voice as James Earl Jones. Do I have water? I, I guess that means I was getting kind of long-winded, at least. So I'll wrap this up. Thank you anyway, James Earl Jones, for your contributions to the Star Wars galaxy. I have water to drink, yeah, Lisa, I do. But thank you, Lisa, for contributing. I'll see you on the next video. Peace. Love you guys. The next video we'll be talking about Trina's appearance in AEW, and also this whole DJ Academics thing of calling other rappers Dusty. Meanwhile, he's just a nobody trying to gain other people's attention. Mm.